My brother Carter and I were very close growing up. I was the older brother by about 3 minutes. I always held it over his head. We were fraternal twins, meaning we looked different. He had wavy blonde hair and blue eyes. I had short black hair and brown eyes. He was also shorter than me. I towered above everyone like a giant. Last year, when we were about 16 years old, thinking out loud, I said, "We should play a game." Carter looked at me. "What kind of game, Jack?" he asked curiously. I grinned. "Remember how Dad asked me to clean out the attic last week?" I said, grinning broadly. He nodded. "Keep talking," he said, edging me on. I stood up and went to our closet and pulled out the game board. "Look what I found," I said excitedly, showing him an old box. His eyes fell. "A box?" he said, rolling his eyes. "It's what's in the box, doofus," I said, urging him to open it. He pulled out an old antique-style Ouija board. His eyes widened. As he sat it on the table by our bunk beds, a slip of paper fluttered to the ground. I picked it up, having not noticed it before. The note said, "This board is cursed." I burst out laughing as I showed the note to my brother, who snickered. I rolled the slip of paper into a small ball and tossed it aside. I sat down next to my brother on the ground and stared at the board. "We should get candles," Carter said, standing up quickly, tiptoeing down the stairs so he wouldn't wake Mom and Dad. He resurfaced in a few minutes with 4 tiny candles. We sat the board in the middle of our table and put the candles on each corner. Carter flickered the lights off in our room. I cleared my throat. So I watched a movie about this. We're supposed to put our hands on the cursor and ask a question. We both put our hands on the cursor. "I'll go first," Carter said, and he asked, "Is anyone there?" Cursor began to shake and move towards yes at the edge of the board. I elbowed Carter. "Stop goofing around," I snapped. He shook his head. "It ain't me," he said, dumbfounded. I went next. "What's your name?" I asked, as my blood boiled with adrenaline and anticipation. The cursor was still for several minutes, but just as I was about to say "this is dumb," it spelled out Doyle. Doyle. "Doyle," Carter said, stifling a chuckle. "You've never been creative," he said to me, chuckling. I agreed. "That wasn't me, you idiot." "Doyle. I've heard that name before." I was starting to feel very uneasy. "Are you friendly?" Carter asked after a moment. Almost immediately, the cursor shot to the no on the edge of the board. I narrowed my eyes. "Are you looking for something or someone?" I asked cautiously. The cursor went to the yes. Carter asked a follow-up question. I had an unsettling feeling in my stomach that I couldn't quite place. "What are you looking for?" he asked. The cursor slowly went to the letters S-O-U-L-S. Carter and I exchanged glances. "Cut it out, Jack, I'm serious," he said angrily. I shook my head. "Bro, it's not me," I said, bewildered. "This is dumb." "Let's just watch a movie instead," I said, standing up and turning the light back on. I blew the candles out, covered the board, and put it back in the closet. It wasn't the scariest thing ever, but it was unsettling. I didn't know what to make of it. I really didn't think much of it as we watched a movie and turned it in for the night. I woke up in a daze. My head was killing me. This wasn't my room. This wasn't my house. It was burning. I shot straight up and looked around. The sky was as black as night. Screams and thunder could be heard echoing in the distance. The only light this place provided was the fire pits that cackled menacingly. I staggered to my feet. "Help! Someone help me!" I screamed as loud as I possibly could. That's when I saw Carter stumble out from behind a giant pit. "Where are we?" Carter said, staying next to my side. "I don't know," I whispered, grabbing his arm for support as we navigated the burning, decaying land. It reeked of burnt flesh and death. That moment, a large figure emerged from the black sky, landing gracefully right in front of us. He was a gargoyle, or an angel, or a demon, or something. He had horns, pointy sharp teeth, a giant mouth. His skin was the colour of fresh blood. And he wore a dark cape. I gaped at him and squeezed Carter's arm. "Who the hell are you? Where the hell are we?" I shouted, more bravely than I felt. The large demonic creature laughed, a horrendous, treacherous laugh. "You are in the land of the damned," he said. His voice was raspy and coarse. It was similar to nails on a chalkboard. It was terrible. "What does that mean?" Carter said, sobbing into my arm. I gripped onto him tightly. The demonic figure smiled, which was not friendly, by the way. "You called upon me, remember?" he said in his raspy voice. I gaped at him. "I am Doyle," he said, finally inching closer to us. We both took 2 steps back. "I'm going to take your souls. They will stay in this place forever and ever and ever," he continued in that voice that was unbearable. "No!" I screamed so loud it shocked Doyle. I grabbed Carter's arm. "Let's go!" I yelled as we began to run straight past lava, past fire pits, and past the screams of the damned. I could see a light. I could hear Doyle trailing behind us. We were almost there. Almost to the light. And then Carter tripped. Doyle's claw-like hand grabbed his leg. He was screaming, "Jack, help me, Jack!" I tried to grab his arm, but he was getting further and further away. In the distance, I heard Doyle shout, echo, "You'll be next." Then, a white light surrounded me. I gasped for air and opened my eyes. I was safe. I was fine. I was in my bed. Everything was fine. It was only a dream. But it felt so real. I climbed down from the ladder of the top bunk to wake Carter up. His eyes were closed. He was clearly still sleeping. I had a nightmare, and I wanted to tell him all about it. I shook Carter. He didn't stir. I said his name. He still didn't move. "Carter!" I yelled. Terror and fear filling me, and I ran downstairs. "Mom, Dad, come quick!" I yelled, barreling into the room. My mum and dad woke up and practically fell out of bed. "Jack, what's wrong?" My mum said as she got to her feet. "It's Carter," I said through my tears. I was gasping for breath and running through the house, leading them to our bedroom. My brother lay there motionless, lifeless. My parents called 911. We spent the entire night in the hospital. I sat in that waiting room, fearing the worst. Whenever the doctor came out to inform us that Carter was in a coma, my mother collapsed in tears into my dad's arms. My dad gripped her tightly, hugging her, also crying. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Carter still hadn't gotten better. Was he stuck in that place? Was his soul trapped? Life went on for everyone but my family. I tried to tell my parents what happened that night. They didn't listen. They didn't believe me. Now, my dad drinks heavily. My mom spends her days crying, and I just sit and stare at the wall. Every day. All day. It's Wednesday morning. In 5 days, it will be a year since Carter went into a coma. My mom was crying, Dad was drinking. Our lives had been hell since Carter had went to sleep and not woken up. I wanted to do something. I pondered and paced back and forth. I had to do something. Either way, eventually Doyle would come for me too. I hoped and prayed that Carter was still alive. I wasn't going to do this unprepared. I went on Google and quickly searched how to safely use a Ouija board. The article said salt, lots of salt. The most important thing was to always say goodbye before quitting. Mentally, I kicked myself. Too late for that now. I searched Doyle, and the only thing I found on him was he was a mythical creature said to feed on the souls of humans. I gulped. He made that pretty clear. So was Carter's soul gone? Or was there still time? I needed to find out how to defeat Doyle. How? How do you defeat a demon, or whatever the hell he is? I began reading little bits and pieces online. I figured there was something I could do. I just had to be creative. I read something about stones apparently helping to ward off evil spirits. There was a crystal shop in my town. I quickly ran downstairs. The kitchen was trashed, empty beer bottles, dirty dishes, and lots of trash. I shook my head sadly as I continued to the door. "Where you going, boy?" my dad said, stumbling into the kitchen. "Hospital," I said quickly, lying through my teeth. He raised an eyebrow before nodding and slumping into the armchair in the living room. I hopped on my bike and rode as fast as I could to the crystal shop. Once there, I realized it was much more than just crystals. It was honestly a really well put together little store. A glass case held all the crystals. There was a wall dedicated to incense. There were different herbs and different properties, and it smelled really nice. "Hey, how can I help you?" the girl at the counter asked me kindly. She had pink hair, heavy eyeliner, and skinny jeans on. She was really pretty. I walked up to the counter. I'm looking for some crystals that might be good for warding off dark forces," I said awkwardly. She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh yeah? I think I've got a couple things that might be good for you," she said, leading me over to the glass case. "How about this?" she said, holding up a crystal attached to a chain. I looked at it. It was blue and was slightly sparkly. "What is it?" I asked, carefully taking it from her. She smiled. "Lapis lazuli. It is said that it is good for warding off evil entities, as well as dream work," she explained. "Sweet," I said, grinning. "I'll take it. How much do I owe you?" I asked, setting the crystal on the counter. $8.73, she said. I handed her a crumpled up 10 bill and yelled a quick thanks as I bolted out the door. I put the necklace around my neck and hopped on my bike. I decided I would stop at the hospital before heading home. I parked my bike outside of the hospital and went inside. I told the lady at the front desk my name, and she told me I could go to my brother's room. I walked slowly down the hallway and took a deep breath before entering. I sat down right by his bedside. He had a table next to him full of flowers and cards. He was hooked up to several machines, and there he lay, motionless. It broke my heart to see him. His blonde hair dangled in his face. I gently moved it aside. Quietly, I whispered, "It's gonna be all right. I'm gonna make everything better. I promise," I said, wanting him to nod or do something. Of course, he was still. I stared at him for 5 more minutes before gaining the courage to go home and face Doyle. I rode my bike home, really slowly, honestly. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't terrified. When I got home, I parked my bike in the garage and went inside. It was almost sundown. I decided to get set up. I placed the Ouija board in the counter on the table, set the candles up, and put my hands on the cursor. "Doyle," I said loudly and clear. "Are you there?" Slowly, the cursor went to the yes. My jaw clenched. Suddenly, my fear turned to rage. The sick monster took my brother and tore my family apart. "Is my brother alive?" I said through clenched teeth. Again, the cursor went to the yes. I hadn't asked another question when the cursor started moving abruptly to other letters, spelling out, "Not for long." And then, "You're next." Angrily, I said, "I'm ready for you." I blew the candles out and threw the board across the room. I began to sob. I sobbed for I don't know how long. I wasn't ready to go to bed yet. I still wasn't prepared, so I fought sleep. I heard that chanting was sometimes used to ward off evil spirits. Then it came to me. Keep us safe from harm. A few years ago, I took a class in Latin. Libera nos a nocere. I would say that over and over. I prayed it would work. I don't think I can keep my eyes awake any longer. I was 11 years old. and had plans to meet my two friends, sisters D and B, at the JCC to go swimming. I regularly walked there since it wasn't that far. I set off for the J, that's what most people called it, with my gym bag. I was wearing shorts and a tank top if I remember correctly. I crossed over Church Street and was walking on the right side of the street. I got to this long, empty building and noticed a dark car with all tinted windows sitting way in the back of the lot. I almost would have walked right past because it was so hidden. He yelled at me. I felt uneasy immediately because my parents were very strict about stranger danger. I said, "Hey." His driver's seat door was open. He asked me to come closer because he wanted to take my picture. And I did by about 3 feet since he was still so far back. I was stupid because he definitely could have driven up and pulled me in. He asked me if I'd modelled before, and I said yes. He then asked if he could take closer pictures. I'd have to come closer though. I freaked. I said I was meeting friends at the JCC. No matter, he kept begging me to come closer. I was terrified. Suddenly I noticed a woman watering her lawn. I said she was my mom and I had to go. I can't remember if he asked my name. I sprinted home, checking behind me once in a while. As soon as I got home, I started sobbing. It all came out. My mom took me to the police station, and to my shock, my friends D and B were there. He'd taken pictures of them. D thought it was funny. B didn't. It was my fault he did that. Pedophile knew they were there because I told him. Apparently, he'd approached another girl near Oakton Pool. He took her picture. We did a composite. He had salt and pepper red hair and a short beard. He was never caught. I know he fully intended to take me. My interaction with him was different than the others. Watch out for things that don't seem right. You'd think a paedophile would have been caught. Not so. Be careful, especially around adults that seem too interested in you or are acting inappropriate. Okay, so before I start, I'd like to state the things that happened in this house are so crazy they may seem hard to believe, but I write everything with no exaggerations. I'm always nervous to share my story because I'm scared they'll know I'm thinking about them. A lot of my memory living in this house is gone due to trauma, but I'll tell the experiences I do remember. Backstory. When I was 10, which was 9 years ago, my family moved to London for my dad's job offer. We lived there for 3 years. The house we moved into was built in the late 19th century by a famous British architect. It consisted of 3 floors with telephones on each floor connecting to the outside. The street my house is on is a historical landmark. There's even a ghost tour which goes down my street where one of the houses was haunted by a poltergeist. Experience 1. Our first day in the house. My mom told us we would have a sleepover in the living room to celebrate moving in. My mom recently told us she wanted us to stay together the first night because she could sense how evil the house was. That night, my mom came running out of the bathroom, screaming. A rat had crawled up her pants and bit her leg. She had to get the rabies shot the next day, and we placed rat poison throughout the house as it was infested with them. Experience 2. Things started to get weird where the fire alarm would go off every night at 3 a.m. Yep, start of witching hour. And it sometimes wouldn't stop after trying to disarm it. Experience 3. Through the house, we would hear faint voices and laughing during the daytime, and at night these laughs would turn to screams. At the time, our parents told it was just the foxes outside, but recently told us they just said this so we wouldn't be scared. The screams were evil, and like someone was in pain. When me and my sisters would play around with the telephones, we would hear voices coming from the outside intercom. Experience 4. We all had nightmares every night. I had a reoccurring nightmare of a lady pushing a little girl on the swings, and then she would turn around, her face looked so evil. She had crazy hair, corpse-like skin, big eyes, and a huge grin that reached across the width of her face. I'd wake up terrified, like I literally just saw a ghost. My older sister told me that she would have nightmares as well. She knew she was dreaming, and in order to wake up from her nightmare, she would have to hold my family's hands in a circle and sing worship songs. Experience 5. In my room, I had these tall closet doors. I always imagined a tall black figure just standing in my closet. I never saw it, but I knew it was there. Sometimes at night, I would hear tapping from inside the closet door that came in patterns. Experience 6. Precious items throughout the house, money, wedding ring, laptop, would go missing and then randomly show up later. The money my sister kept inside her safe and hid, the key, also went missing. Experience 7. Hallucination? One night when I was trying to go to bed, I heard my mom from downstairs crying, "Please leave, I have children, please just leave." When I explained to her what happened and asked her if someone had broken in the next day, she was so confused and said no. She had no memory of the event, but it seemed so real. She sounded so desperate, and I remember it vividly. Experience 8. My mom and I were setting up the dining room table when my younger sister runs in and tells us of the little girl she's made friends with in her room and how they play together. When my mom freaked out, my sister said, "Oh, don't worry, she's not bad." She began having hallucinations in her room at night of a man yelling at a little girl in a very deep voice. It freaked her out so much, she started sleeping with me in my room. We stayed on the 3rd floor. Aggression begins. Experience 9. My mum would bathe me and my sister together, and after we were done in the bath, she would grab a towel, wrap us in them, and pick us out of the tub. One time, after she had taken my younger sister out, she picked me up and then tripped, causing us to crush my younger sister onto the bathroom floor. We laughed it off, but my mom seemed freaked. She told us recently she felt something push her. Experience 10. We all began to feel slight touches and pushing. Whenever I would walk up the stairs to my room, I would always feel something close behind me and chasing me, so I started running up every time. Experience 11. I think for a time, the demons became attached to us as well as the house. One day when I was at school, I started hearing what sounded like multiple voices laughing at me, saying things like, "You can't do it," "pathetic." I started crying and my teacher said I was having an anxiety attack. But the voices were so clear and loud, like they were right beside me. I think it was the demons messing with my head. Going through old photos, very disturbing pictures of the spirits have been called photobombing pictures. We're all good and happy now, but I will never forget that house. A few years ago, my grandpa passed away from lung cancer. We were really close and had a special bond. I didn't know how bad his cancer was in the days leading up to his passing. He was a very religious and kind-hearted man. A few days before we passed, I randomly decided to read my Bible, and when we heard the news, I felt comforted rather than distraught. My dad told me to pick a few Bible verses for his funeral, and when I gave my dad the verses I'd chosen, his face dropped. He looked up at me and said, "These are the exact same 3 Bible verses your grandpa picked with the pastor before he passed." There are a total of 31,102 verses in the Bible, and I picked the same 3 as him. I feel like this was his way of connecting with me. And my grandma had been in a hospice care for a while, and there was a period where she was doing really well, and the doctors were saying she may be able to go home. But in that time, I had a dream where my grandpa came to me and gave me a hug and said, "Shh, you have to be quiet. I love you." and then walked over to my grandma, who was sitting in her wheelchair, and wheeled her away with him as they were greeted by all our family relatives who had passed. I told my mom this dream the next morning, as it was really weird because my grandma was finally doing better. Not even 2 weeks later, my grandma developed a very bad infection that resulted in her passing. On her deathbed, she started calling out the names of all her loved ones that had passed. This gave me so much comfort because I know they are both okay and happy, and that there is life after death. I can't wait to see them again. My wife and I live in the country, far from anybody else. We live in a small cabin my parents had built years ago. It was nice and quiet, just the way we liked it. Every night we would sit on the porch, staring into the woods, looking at the stars, and listening to the sounds of nature. One night my wife said, as we sat on the porch watching the night pass by, "Do you hear that humming?" I looked up at her. "Yes, I love when the animals of the forest sing to us," I said soothingly. She shook her head. "No, this is different. It's a person, humming a sweet tune," she said, standing up and walking to the edge of the porch. I chuckled. We had been drinking tonight. I imagined she had too many and was hearing things. I shook my head. "I think it's time for bed, my love," I said as I guided her back into our home and into the bedroom. I turned the light off and laid down next to her. I fell asleep almost instantly. At 3:05 in the morning, I woke up to an empty bed. I imagined my wife had gotten up to use the toilet, so I just went back to sleep. At 8 a.m, I woke up, but my wife was still nowhere to be seen. It was odd. I usually was the first to wake up, and I'd usually cook her breakfast. I got up and searched the house. She was nowhere to be found. I was starting to panic at this point. I called the authorities, who said they couldn't do anything for 2 days. Apparently, a person has to be gone 2 days to even be considered a missing person. I called my wife's sister, who said, "No, I haven't heard from her." Her mother said the same thing. As night approached, I sat on the porch and my mind wandered to our conversation the night before. "Do you hear that humming?" she had said, and at that moment, I heard it. I heard it loud and clear, calling to me. What a sweet melody it was. I followed the humming. I followed it blindly. I followed the humming because that's where my wife would be. So I've always had an attraction to the paranormal or anything supernatural, even as a young child. My babysitters made me watch A Nightmare on Elm Street when I was 5, and it just went from there. I've never been easily frightened. In fact, I'd say I've been frightened twice in my life. One was when I thought my house was being broken into. It wasn't. And the other time happened when I moved to a house in Manchester at the age of 7. The house was big and creepy to look at, I guess, but my family never really thought so. My bedroom was tiny, and it was all the way at the back of the house. My parents put me there because I was a sleepwalker, and being at the back of the house, they'd hear me walking around before I got too far. The other thing about being there was that it was dead silent at night, because it was so far away from everyone else's room. My room had this big, thick-framed window. They were old, but very well made, and they also completely nullified outside noise. It was like being in a vacuum once my door was closed. My first night in that room left me feeling uncomfortable. I always felt like I wasn't alone in the room whenever I was trying to go to sleep. It unsettled me, but I never mentioned it or complained to my family. I'd been living there for about half a year, with the same feeling more or less every night. And then one night, I woke up. For absolutely no reason. This was unusual because I'm a deep sleeper and rarely happens to me. I just felt like I shouldn't be asleep. Like there was a voice telling me to wake. Now. I sat up and my room was silent, as usual, and completely dark. It was always really dark on the floor space because my bunk bed and curtains completely drowned out light. When I sat up, I looked over the side of the top bunk. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel something. I lay back down and tried to clear the feeling I was being watched out of my mind. I turned my head to look out of my window and drew the curtains back, and immediately got the feeling I was being watched again, but closer, like someone had climbed half of the steps on my bed and stopped to look at me. I quickly glanced around, but again couldn't see anything, even with the moonlight and streetlights coming through my window. For the third time, I felt I was being watched and turned to the window again. An old man, probably in his 60s, was stood on our garage roof. I immediately shut my eyes. Our garage connected to our house through a little cooler room, and the roof of that room was below my window. I told myself I was imagining things and opened them again. He was still there, but closer now. I could see his face clearly. He had deep-set eyes that were brown, balding silver hair and greying stubble. He had a hook's nose and thin lips. The most bizarre part were his teeth. They were perfect. Straight and white, but the moonlight hit them and it just made them look menacing. His attire looked old. It looked like a costume from Oliver Twist. He was dirty, covered in dried dirt or soot. I could only keep my eyes on him for a second or two before I closed them again. When I opened them, his face was pressed right up against my window. I fainted or fell back to sleep and didn't wake until morning. When I woke, I was on my bottom bunk. I never slept on the bottom bunk. I don't even have a mattress or sheets on there. I didn't immediately remember the events of the night before and just assumed I'd been sleepwalking and stopped there. I went through my normal morning routine and got ready for school. My mum dropped me off and I went into a shop near my school to get some sweets before school. As I walked in the shop, all the events of the night before hit me. I remembered all of it, and it immediately shook me to my core. I was that frightened, I told my teacher, who called my mum and she'd picked me up and brought me home. My mum reassured me that it was just a dream, but I knew it wasn't. It was weeks until I'd even step foot in my room again, even longer until I'd sleep in there. Eventually, I did sleep in there again. I never saw the old man. I never even dreamed about him. I did have another experience about a year later.